11th. My first day on the job as vice mayor, and we're already starting the meeting late. Late is, I think, my middle name, so I apologize to everybody for getting started. We're going to go ahead and begin the meeting today with our invocation, and I would like to then ask Councilman Skip Kelly if he'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Don Duncan, who's the chaplain for the Oklahoma County Sheriff's Office, is here, and if everyone would please stand.
Pray with me. Father, we thank you for this day that you have honored us with. We thank you that your mercies are new this day. Father, as we seek your divine wisdom, I pray that you would anoint each council member with that discerning spirit. And we pray, Father, that you will guide throughout every aspect as we seek to honor your name throughout Oklahoma City. Father, I thank you for each person that is gathered here, and we do pray that you will guide us in every aspect of life as we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do have one very special proclamation this morning. Today we're going to recognize White Cane Safety Day. And we have with us a couple of representatives. We have Vicki Golightly, Sandy Webster, and Linda Moore are all here. If you all would please come forward, I'm going to ask the city clerk to go ahead and read the proclamation.
Whereas the white cane is used by hundreds of Oklahoma City residents who are legally blind to allow them to navigate our city and access its public places, schools, and businesses. Whereas with proper training, people using the white cane can enjoy greater mobility and safety by determining the location of curbs, steps, uneven pavement, and other physical obstacles in their path. Whereas the white cane has opened the doors of opportunity to thousands of blind Oklahomans by enabling them to travel freely and independently in their communities. Whereas the white cane is now universally recognized as a symbol of blindness that improves the safety of blind pedestrians by alerting drivers when a visually impaired person is crossing a street, parking area, or other areas open to the public. Whereas Oklahoma law requires vehicle drivers to come to a full stop at least 15 feet away from a visually impaired pedestrian using a white cane or a dog guide, and take such precautions before proceeding as may be necessary to avoid accident or injury to the person who is wholly or partially blind. Whereas, to honor the many achievements of blind and visually impaired citizens and to recognize the white cane's significance in advancing independence, the United States Congress, by joint resolution approved October 6, 1964, has designated October 15th of each year as White Cane Safety Day. Now, therefore, Mick Cornett, the mayor of the city of Oklahoma City, does hereby proclaim October 15, 2011 as White Cane Safety Day in Oklahoma City, and he calls upon all citizens to observe this day by recognizing the significance of the white cane, both as a symbol of independence and as a simple tool that enables Oklahoma City residents with visual disabilities to participate more fully in the social and economic life of our community.
Francis, thank you very much. Let's give a big round of applause in recognition of October 15th as White Cane Day. I had a chance a little bit earlier to meet Bolton, and Bolton is one of these wonderful guide dogs. He's been in service for 6 years, I believe you said, and he's just a wonderfully sweet guy. And I think, Vicki, you said you were elected to make a couple of remarks on behalf of the group.
Bolton steals the show every time, and he should. On behalf of the Heartland Council of the Blind, which is a chapter of the Oklahoma Council of the Blind, we very much appreciate this proclamation. The white cane and the dog guide is indeed a symbol of independence and allows blind and visually impaired individuals to navigate in their environment and to go about their professional and business lives. We'll be walking at the new outlet mall at 10 o'clock on October 15th. So if anyone would like to join us, feel free to do so. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki. We hope you'll be walking and shopping at the new outlet mall. It's really awesome, so please do. Thank you for coming down, and again, let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much. Okie dokie, see if we can get all this squared away. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order now. From the Office of the Mayor, in addition to the proclamation, I think Councilman McAtee has asked that we move forward the presentation to be made with regard to EMSA.
Yes, do I need to make a motion on that? Yes. I'd like to move the presentation on the EMSA to the front so we can give it full attention.
We have a second. Cast your votes, please. All those in favor? Oh, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. City Manager?
Madam Vice Mayor, at the workshop that we had, Councilman Ryan asked that we have a third party to review the numbers that were presented regarding EMSA. And so we've asked our independent financial advisor, PFM, to review that. And this morning we have Vijay Kapoor from PFM to make a presentation regarding EMSA. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, members of council, members of the city, thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Vijay Kapoor. I'm the Director of Workforce Consulting at Public Financial Management, or PFM as we're known. As Mr. Couch indicated, we are the financial advisor for Oklahoma City. The city asked us to undertake an independent evaluation of the financial analysis that was submitted by both EMSA and by the fire department for this window of opportunity. We were not asked to give any analysis in terms of operational issues, such as response time or such as quality of care, nor were we asked to give a recommendation as to the policy decision that you all have before you. Over the past month, we have had the opportunity to meet multiple times, speak multiple times with both the department and with EMSA regarding their different proposals. And prior to submitting our final report, which you have in front of you and which I'll take you through today, we gave the opportunity to both EMSA and the fire department to review our analysis and to comment upon it. We'd like to thank EMSA, the department, as well as the city for all of their assistance in getting us the information and in working with us. In the interest of time, I know many of you probably have some questions about this report. I'm not going to go through every particular page in the report, but I'm obviously happy to answer any questions that you may have. So now turning to our analysis, let me first say that we were extremely impressed by the professionalism of both EMSA and by the fire department, by the cooperation we received, and frankly of the quality of work that was presented before us. In doing these types of analyses, I can tell you that in many cases there's an adversarial relationship between the parties, and that was not the case here. That both parties, I think, work professionally. That's not to say that there was complete agreement across the board, particularly with regards to staffing. I'll get to that in a moment. But we believe that the analysis and the differences of opinion were based on honest disagreements, based on honest disagreements that you will generally have in this type of analysis. As to the analysis itself, generally speaking, we found that most assumptions made by both the department and EMSA to be reasonable. We believe that both sides accounted for the major financial risks that frankly, either decision, whether you stick with EMSA or go with the fire department, may receive. Though I'm obviously not in your shoes, I think you can feel comfortable that the major financial issues have been accounted for. That being said, there are unknowns that we still have here. Particularly with respect to the impact of federal health care legislation and the economy. Those will continue to exist regardless of the path that you decide to go. And obviously, whether this is successful or doesn't work is going to be based on implementation, not based on what's on paper. The final point I want to make here with regard to the financial analysis is that the financial case for the city withdrawing from EMSA really depends upon whether the city could obtain the ambulances and equipment that's currently being used by EMSA for little or no cost. If the city would need to purchase about 30 or 40 new ambulances, that would make this financial analysis look very, very different. And given that Tulsa has indicated that they were going to stay with the EMSA Trust, this issue is unresolved. So moving now to some of the numbers. Our report is set up by first taking a high-level summary of the fiscal projections, and then looking in a little more detail at some of the expense lines. The next 3 pages of the report are high-level comparisons of the different options as calculated by EMSA and by the department. These are the numbers that were provided to us by both EMSA and the department. Page 5 has EMSA's Western Division revenue and expenditure projections from fiscal year 14, 15, and 16. In this case, the bulk of the expenses, as most of you know, come from the ambulance services contract, which is currently held by Paramedics Plus, and which is due for rebid in 2013. Page 6 is the comparison of the fire department's projected revenues and expenditures of the fire transport model with the subsidy that EMSA has projected. Of course, the fire transport model is the model where the department would provide the ambulance services in-house. I believe this was Councilman White had asked for a comparison of the sort of a side-by-side of both EMSA and the department's projections. This, sir, is that slide. You'll note that if these estimates are correct, and of course if the city does not have to pay for a whole new fleet of new ambulances, then the city could see a small savings over time. But if there is even a small negative deviation in the estimated revenues or the expenditures, then those savings would quickly disappear. So, if, for example, if you look at the last column of this chart, which is the 3-year estimate, this is all 3 years, the department's anticipated savings are approximately $742,000. But if revenues come in 1% lower than what is projected, or if expenditures come in about 0.8% higher than expected, then the savings go away. And this is what we refer to when you see the term risk deviation. Page 7, we show the department's estimates for the fire contract model. This is where the department would essentially manage the contract for ambulance services, not provide them directly. Because these cost estimates are more than the expected support for EMSA, I don't plan to spend a lot of time discussing it at the meeting this morning, unless any of you have additional questions, and would, again, be happy to discuss any of those. I'd like to take us now through the evaluation we did on both the revenues and the expenditures. And let me start with the revenues, and I think this is an important part to take a look at. Ensuring that you're maximizing revenues is critical from a fiscal perspective, because even if you cut expenses, if your revenues aren't coming in at the same rate or at better rate, you may not see a savings. Page 9 gives you EMSA's revenue estimates for Oklahoma City for the fiscal years 14, 15, and 16, which are based on a 3% annual growth rate. EMSA, as most of you know, rather than contract with a third party, handles the billing in-house using their own staff. Moving to the department's estimates, both department models, the fire transport and the fire contract, estimate that they would bring in the same revenues as EMSA over this time period. The big difference between EMSA's model and what the fire department is proposing is that the department proposes to contract with a third party to do the billing and collections. So page 11 provides you some of the revenue risk and opportunities from withdrawing from EMSA. The big unknown here, and I'll get to in a little bit, is whether a third-party billing provider could do a better job of collections than EMSA does. And again, from a risk perspective, a key question that the council should keep in mind is whether there would be any transition issues moving from a system that's already in place to a new collection system. Let me now take you through the expenditures. Page 13 provides you with EMSA's expenditure estimates for fiscal year 14, 15, and 16 for the entire Western Division.
Can I ask you to go back just a little bit?
Yes, sir.
The assumption with regard to MSIS, well, not the assumption, the fact that MSIS cost of collection is 4% of revenue, and it's done in-house. Do you have comparisons of what the percentage of revenue is lost when you have to, in other ways, if we contracted with somebody? I mean, I'm sure the 4% is the 4% of gross revenue, not the 4% of that's referred out for collection.
Yes.
But what do you have the idea of what that is?
Well,
is that a good rate of cost of collection compared to, say, other methods of doing it, or is that a bad rate, or is that a rate that we could expect to achieve some other way?
Well, if one looks at what a third party would charge to do it, they generally charge between, the department got some estimates, generally charge between 4% and 6% of collections to do that.
So that's at the bottom end of the range of what it normally would charge.
Based on the conversations that the department had with other third-party vendors. The other question would be is how efficient and how good would they be in terms of collecting those revenues. So it's got to be 4% of something. So if you're more efficient at it, that may be a higher amount.
Right.
I think the 4% is reasonable. To answer your question, sir, we did not do like a benchmarking in terms of what other entities would charge or whether that 4% is something that we see often.
Right. Well, I think my question, though, goes to kind of, if you're getting ready to change, you need to know what's out there in the market. If you were contemplating changing it, well, you'd want to know what you're going to expect out there. Is 4% what you would expect in the market? Is that a...
Yes, sir. I think based on the department...
I'm asking it again, but I'm not sure you answered it.
No, then let me answer. The department did ask, and 4% to 6% is what they see in the market.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But for purposes of this analysis, you're assuming that fire is contracting out at 6%.
That's correct. That is the number that the department used.
So if a third party was willing to do it for 4% or 5%, you'd realize greater savings.
You would realize greater savings, assuming that the collection efficiency is the same as has been done in-house.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And that's some of the difficulty of doing the budgeting and doing sort of the forecasting is a lot of this is done based on the information we have now. A key question is what will this look like if it's implemented? Will you be able to realize greater revenues? When you go out for bid, can you get it lower? Will people go higher? Will there be any costs in terms of putting together equipment or software from transitioning over? A lot of those, unfortunately, are unknown. So the best we can do is based on research and based on reaching out to vendors who could possibly do this.
Now, if you bid this out to a third party, they would bid a percentage of the gross revenue that they would take for managing the entire collection process. Am I clear?
That's generally what's done, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But what you can't determine is their success at getting the money.
Sure. Right. No, I understand that. That's a variable you just don't know about. But that's how it's bid. If you put it on an RFP, the response would come back as a percentage of gross revenues.
Well, you would probably bid it however you all would want to bid it, but typically speaking, you generally do it based on the revenue, sir.
What percentage of transports are those who have opted in on their utility bill?
I don't know the actual percentage of those, sir.
Because there wouldn't be any collection on that, right? From the patient.
Well, from the patient, right? From the insurance company, you would have to, or you might have that case.
And what percentage is Medicare, federal, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE?
I don't know the answer to that, sir.
Okay. All right.
Right. Our analysis on the revenues was really focused on the percentage of revenues collected. Let me jump back ahead here.
I'm still not sure. If an RFP would say, what percentage would you charge based on gross revenue? That gross revenue would include the money that just comes in automatically through the opt-in process. Is that right? Or would it be a percentage of all other amounts? I know I'm splitting the hair, but it seems to make a difference to me as to what percentage is paid out. I'm really trying to more understand the process, I think, than I am understanding which proposal is better. But
Let me take a stab at this. I don't think the money that the city collects in its water bill would be considered in the revenue stream for IMSA. That is used to pay the shortfall from what IMSA collects in their revenue stream. Is that correct, Steve? Okay. So when they're saying 6% of revenue, they're talking about what IMSA collects, not including the city money.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you.
From insurers and from patients, the total of insurers versus patients.
Well, probably from all other it's probably from all other sources other than the opt-in on the water bill. Everything. Right. Okay. That makes sense.
The reason that that's important, the Medicare is electronic, it's very easy, you get that money, it's very easy to collect. What takes the manpower and the hours and the overhead is trying to get money from patients, from third parties, et cetera. So that's why it's important to know what percentage is from Medicare.
Sure, and in both of those cases, the issues would be faced by both the department as well as by IMSA, regardless of which way you choose to go. You're going to face both of those issues.
Right.
Councilman Shadid, I would just qualify that statement a little bit. The process of collecting the money from Medicare is a simple process. It is electronic transfer, but it's the billing process that is challenging, and we have quite a few physicians and other medical-related businesses that truly struggle with that. I mean, it's a challenge.
With emergency medical transport?
No, just with Medicare in general.
Right. Here, I don't know that we're talking about a whole bunch of different CPT codes. I don't know that the billing is...
Yeah, IMSA, we get reports from them all the time. IMSA constantly has to reconnect with Medicare to prove that what they're charging or the people that they transported or that the things that they use fall under Medicare's guidelines. So I think there's an enormous amount of time that IMSA's billing department spends proving to Medicare that it's eligible for the expenses. Yes, once they get them approved, it's an easy transfer, but I think the majority of the time is spent clarifying the calls and the transport and what was happened on the calls to make sure that it's Medicare eligible.
Yes, sir.
Could somebody answer this, and maybe this is out of place right now, but we just had a situation in my family where we were trying to decide whether my mother-in-law should be transported by ambulance from the nursing home to the hospital. And what I thought from prior experience was that if this was not a medical emergency, even though she's under Medicare, she's 91 years old, that Medicare would not pay for that transport. And so do they not have to decide on an individual basis whether a particular Medicare patient is eligible for Medicare to reimburse IMSA for that or not? So it's not a cut and dry thing that every Medicare patient for every ride that goes from point A to the hospital is a Medicare reimbursable expense or charge. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. Now let me move to page 13 now, as we're talking about expenditures now. Page 13 provides you with IMSA's expenditure estimates for fiscal year 14, 15, and 16, again, for the entire Western Division. Now, the key variable here is what the ambulance services contract would look like. Assuming that the city continues with IMSA, the ambulance contract held by Paramedics Plus will be rebid in 2013. In terms of the size of the Paramedics Plus contract, I believe it's roughly about $25 million. So it's a significant component of the expenses for IMSA. Now, moving into the evaluation, the expenditures for the fire transport model, I'd like to call your attention to page 16. There are two differences here between this chart and the one that appeared in the fire department's initial analysis. First, we broke out the line entitled Other into medical supplies and fleet. And secondly, the department raised its cost estimate upward for medical supplies. And again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each line item in detail, but I do want to spend a little bit of time on those line items that are of most significant cost, as well as where the department and EMSA had differences of opinion. So let me start on page 17 with the biggest area, which is personnel. As council knows from earlier presentations, ambulance staffing projections are done based on unit hours, which is the time that a fully staffed and equipped ambulance can respond to an emergency. EMSA currently staffs the entire Western Division at about 587 hours a day using something called a dynamic posting system, where ambulances are rotated to different locations once a call goes out. The contractor, Paramedics Plus, was absolutely adamant that they have to use dynamic posting in order to meet the mandated response time. One thing we asked the department to do was to convert its proposed staffing arrangement into unit hours. And when you do this, it equates to 549 unit hours a day, which is about 6% less than EMSA staffing for the entire Western Division. The department proposes to have 14 station-based ambulances and up to 20 dynamically posted ambulances. Of course, ambulances also need personnel to maintain them and to stock them. Paramedics Plus does this at a central location using non-EMS personnel, and the fire department anticipates having EMS personnel restock and clean the station-based ambulances and have the other ambulances stocked and cleaned at a central location. Page 18 sets forth some of the assumptions that the department used in projecting staffing. Essentially, the way the department proposes to do this is to staff the ambulances using a combination of both full-time and part-time paramedics and EMTs, more senior officers who are also paramedics and EMTs, and using overtime shifts. The way the department had chosen to do this was, again, using those entities and the number of individuals, and that, if we looked at it, would be 549 unit hours per day. This takes into account leave, it takes into account vacation, and also assumes, of course, that the department will only provide service to the city. Page 19 has a breakdown of shows the conversion of those fire transport positions and the shifts to arrive at that daily unit hour calculation of 549. Page 20 notes some of EMSA's concerns with the fire transport staffing estimates as well as the ambulance deployment strategy. Again, as I indicated earlier, we weren't asked to do an operational analysis, and I'm not the right person to tell you with respect to response time or quality of care. But in a nutshell, what EMSA believes is that the department will need more dispatch personnel and materials handlers. Those are the individuals who clean and restock the ambulances. At a minimum, EMSA believes that the correct estimate for these positions would add a little over $1 million a year to the cost, which, again, if we recall, if you had about $742,000 savings over 3 years, if it were an additional $1 million, those savings would be gone. And additionally, EMSA does not believe the department could meet the mandated response times using any form of a station-based ambulance deployment system. On page 21, we note the personnel cost estimated by the department, which we found to be reasonable, if not even a little conservative, in the retiree benefit area. The fire department assumed a retiree benefit of 13%, which is what you have for firefighters. The civilian retirement benefit is an 8.5%. So the fire department was a bit more conservative in their estimates in this note. We'll talk a little bit about workers' compensation. That was based on a per capita currently used by the fire personnel. But in terms of personnel costs, the takeaway we'd like to note to council is we believe that the department accounted for the major benefits and other personnel costs that they would need to incur based on the staffing arrangement that they have proposed. Moving to slide 22, as to most of the other expenses, the department based its estimates on EMSA's fiscal year 2012 budget for the Western Division using a proportion of 82%.
Can I interrupt you again to get you to go back?
Yes, sir.
You said something a second ago that to me goes to the core of what we're talking about. You said EMSA believes that that fire cannot meet the response times with a station-based operation.
Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate on that? I mean, I know from past experience that 20 years ago, there was a demonstration in Tulsa where the company that at that point in time had the contract, AMR, developed a computer program that you were able to just take a day and say, okay, this is your station-based program. You take a day and pick any day you want to, and we'll just start showing you what happens. And on that basis, the station-based system failed. It could not do it. But it seems to me that with a combination of a station-based program and a dynamically posted program, it might have a better opportunity to work. Has there been a test done of it, or is that just a belief that it won't work?
I don't believe, I don't want to speak for us, I don't believe a test was done in this particular case.
I mean, that goes to the core of it, because if it doesn't work, you can just stop right there. If it doesn't work, then you can't make the response times, it's over. I mean, there's no point in continuing the discussion if you can't make the response times. But that was not tested one way or the other. I know it was tested 20 years ago because I saw it done. I saw just a random day pulled out of the air, and they had it all figured out, a computer program, and it failed within about 2 hours.
I can tell you, Councilman, it was not done by us in this analysis. That's well outside of our area of expertise. But that would be the test that you would want to look to do in terms of understanding the response time.
Do you know who's arriving first now for Priority 1 calls?
I don't know the answer, sir.
But what if I told you that fire was arriving 83% of the time faster right now with their current system?
Again, I think the answer, I could, again, I'm not qualified to speculate on what that would have with response times. I think the thing to do would be to have an analysis done on specifically with respect to response time, and we frankly wouldn't be, I certainly would not be the right person to do that.
Jim, are you familiar with any kind of process that would allow us to analyze that?
Well, I think we know the numbers that right now is that because of the number of stations that they have, the fire performs first, but all are not emergency response units that respond.
Well, fire is responding out of 35 fire stations.
That's correct.
But they're only talking about having ambulances in 14. If you only counted the ambulances stations at 14, I would imagine the response time would be equivalent to what IMSA's response time is. But I don't think fire is proposing not to still send first responder engine companies on the calls that need them. So you're still going to get fire engine company if it's required in the system first before a fire transport system gets there.
Right.
So you're still going to have the same situation whichever way you go. But if you compared only 14 station-based ambulances on the fire department responding, I think you're going to get the same or close to the same as whatever IMSA is giving you now.
Well, it's 14 departmental-based and then 20 dynamically based.
Right.
Right, but versus the full use of every one of the fire stations currently.
Well, the way it is now, you have 26 or 28 station-based, and then you've got, when you're looking at who gets there, you've got 28 fire stations. Is that right, 28 or 26?
35.
25?
35.
35. Time just flies by.
Yeah.
There's 35. You got 35, plus you have all the dynamically posted ones, so you've got 50 or so opportunities the way it is now.
But not transport systems.
No, yeah, I know, but Councilman Shadid was talking about first on the spot.
Right.
So you got 50 or so all the time at the first on the spot stuff. We wouldn't have that under the fire-based system. You'd only have, it wouldn't be responding the same way, I guess. I would just like to see if it'd work. Just a flat statement it won't work is pretty crucial, I think, to the process. But if there was a computer program that you could figure out how it, just take a random day and see if it worked, that would make a lot of difference.
think that what we charged through this study was kind of a financial analysis
Right.
of the process rather than an operations
Okay.
analysis, but that doesn't mean
Right.
that maybe in this quick look we ought
Right.
to do that as well.
Right.
Moving to page 22, as I had indicated, I'd like to now go through some of the other expense, other line item expenses, and most of those were estimated based on, again, using a proportion of 82%, which is the percentage of transports for Oklahoma City. For the purposes of this analysis, we think that using that proportional basis is reasonable. Though if the department only serves the city, you may lose some of those economies of scale, and therefore the cost may be underestimated. And as we go through some of the next several pages, I'll note some of the financial risks and opportunities where appropriate. So starting with page 23 on the capital expenses, this notes the capital expenses of ambulances and other equipment. Again, assuming that the department could acquire the ambulances currently being used by EMSA for no cost. Again, this is based on an 82% of EMSA's Western Division capital budget. Page 24 has the relevant non-personnel expenses. This includes building expenses and non-disposable medical supplies. On page 25, we've highlighted the building expenses, noting that the department included the full cost for rent and maintenance of buildings that EMSA currently leases. The department believes that they may eventually be able to reduce these costs using existing buildings already owned by the city. And if they could do so, then there's a potential to save a significant portion of the $710,000 that's estimated in this area. On page 26, we note the cost for disposable medical supplies. The key question here really is whether the city could get better pricing or whether it would get worse pricing than EMSA if it procured these supplies itself. Again, based on this analysis, we use the 82%. Currently, these medical supplies are purchased by Paramedics Plus and included in the fee that they charge EMSA. On page 27, we provided the department's estimate for fleet expenses. The department used its current annual cost per apparatus, which is about $16,000, and then based its estimate on 60 ambulances. Now, again, these estimates may be a little conservative, may be somewhat high, because the department believed that it could operate with closer to 42 ambulances. So in the estimates, you have the $1.1 million. If you would be using the 42 ambulances, that would be closer to $750,000. So again, a possible savings, but again, using the numbers that were provided to us in the study, that's the amount that was that we included. Now, as has been discussed here, there is also the opportunity that both sides noted to save money to the city in this area if one reduces the number of duplicate EMSA calls and fire department responses. Page 28 notes some additional items. Workers' compensation, I know, was an issue that was touched on in EMSA's presentation. That is included in the risk management line, and again was used based on the department's average for firefighters. On page 29, we provided the estimates again for the billing contractor. As we discussed earlier, the department assumed the contractor would charge 6% of revenues, although some contractors, again, may be willing to do that for less. And again, from a financial perspective, the key question is whether the third party really could do a better job than EMSA in terms of collecting revenues. I mean, additionally, under this scenario, if there are incorrect or improper billings, the city would be liable. Page 30 provides the startup cost for bringing dispatch services in-house. As I know Council has discussed in prior meetings, this really is an opportunity for savings as well as improved service delivery in terms of personnel and obviously of better coordination. So slide 31 is a bit of a high level.
I'm sorry, can I stop you right there? Because I think for me this goes to the heart of what I mean. We can go through all this. I think that how the vote is going to go is pretty clear. But what I'm interested in is, regardless of which system whoever does transport, EMSA or fire, is that the dispatch system gets modified. And so I'm wondering what exactly you've looked at. You indicated that IMSA estimates a $1.275 million savings on fuel and vehicle repair. Can you elaborate on what you've done in terms of savings by changing the dispatch system? Because I think regardless of who takes over, there's a consensus that we want to realize these savings.
We didn't do a quantification analysis in terms of what would actually happen if dispatch was merged. I mean, the savings would be in fewer calls, right? And it would be and the cost per call would be really where the savings are, and that would be in terms of gas and in terms of vehicle maintenance. We haven't done, and we weren't asked to do a specific analysis in terms of what that savings would be per call.
I mean that seems kind of central to the cost. If you've got 20,000, so you didn't do your own analysis, you just relied on IMSA's contention that it would be a $1.275 million?
No, sir. In fact, we didn't estimate a cost for savings of dispatch. There wasn't a, I'm not sure the $1.27 million savings number.
That's on page 27. You said that IMSA estimates that this could result in up to $1.275 million in savings on fuel and vehicle repair and replacement.
Oh, no, I apologize, sir. That was based on information provided to us by IMSA. We didn't do an independent analysis in terms of that. Nor, frankly, did we factor it in that overall chart in the beginning of the presentation that had the comparison of fire and had the comparison of IMSA.
I mean, we can ask Chief Bryant, but isn't that one of fire's contentions, that they're going to save money by not doing redundant calls?
But that's also a position of IMSA. IMSA also believes the same thing, and so IMSA believes that that savings could be done either by taking it in-house or if IMSA did the calls. So it's not necessarily that the savings would accrue to either the department or to IMSA. The contention by IMSA was that there would be a savings of
that just seems like an important piece to the puzzle. And so in this financial analysis, we didn't really look at dispatch, consolidating dispatch and its effect on revenue and expenditures.
I think what I'm hearing is that it's consistent with regard to either decision that we make, that if we consolidate the dispatch process, regardless of who provides the transport, we're going to realize those savings.
That's correct. That's correct.
From that standpoint, it doesn't make any difference how big the savings are. If it's $1 or $1 million, it still accrues to the benefit of the city. And whether it's the savings by A or B, it doesn't make any difference. The savings is exactly the same.
Okay, I'd just like to follow up with Chief Bryant on that later.
Sure. Before I conclude, I wanted to, on page 36, call council's attention to one final area, which are the financial costs that might stem from transitioning from IMSA to the fire department. These include hiring expenses, training expenses, and additional resources needed to handle services that would be brought in-house, such as procurement. These items were not included in the cost calculations, but again, we wanted to put those before council. Those would include things such as recruiting. Obviously, if you were to bring this in-house, you would need to hire these individuals, and there would be costs in testing, would be costs in training that you might anticipate occurring. So let me conclude my presentation where I started by saying, based on our analysis, we believe that the assumptions and projections were reasonable for the purposes of this analysis, for the purposes of choosing between whether staying with IMSA or going in-house with the fire department, but that unknowns will continue to exist. We think that through this process, both parties have made a good faith effort to project revenues and expenses, and that council should be confident that the major financial risks have been raised. We appreciated, again, the opportunity to serve the city, and happy to take any additional questions that council may have.
Questions?
As to thank the consultant for the job he did, in this conclusion on page 38, the first paragraph sums up exactly what I had in mind. It's just a test to the assumptions, and we didn't ask him to do the kind of analysis he's asked several times during the course of this presentation. I think you got to make it clear to anybody who's watching, it's not a failure of the consultant's work. He responded in terms of what we asked him to do, and he did a good job in that area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that.
And so clarifying that, Pat, really what we have here is a report that tests the validity of the assumptions that were made in the two presentations that were made to us by Fire and by IMSA.
That's essentially the question I asked during the workshop.
And if I may clarify, it was the financial estimates is what we looked at, not operations.
And so that it's really our charge now to go back and take a look at those and make a decision based on the information that's been provided. Councilman McAtee.
Yeah, a question.
Sir.
In the final summation, and I agree with what Councilman Ryan was saying, what Mayor Salyer was saying, but in looking at these two alternatives, what I heard you say is that nowhere in your charge or your focus of study was to determine the reasonableness of the conversion costs if we decide to go to Fire. It's going to cost some amount of money to go from our current model to the Fire model. Is that a correct assumption?
There would be some costs.
Some cost. And that some cost was not identified as far as your charge to evaluate how much that cost is and whether that cost is a reasonable figure.
Yeah, we did not. We did not identify that specific, what additional testing or...
But in the strict business model from where I come from, that cost would, let's say it was $100,000. There's going to be some length of time for this Fire model to be tested out. Let's say it's 5 years. That charge should be allocated so much a year, $20,000 a year over the 5-year period to account for that conversion cost. And I suspect that it's a lot more than $100,000. Would not the legitimacy, doesn't somebody have to provide us with what that conversion cost is, or has it been provided in another study? Do we know how much it's going to cost us to implement the Fire model should it be chosen?
Larry, I thought part of the question, and correctly, part of the question is related to whether or not we acquire the ambulances.
And that was the second question, but I think
to the degree that the fire department evaluated in their analysis of what the cost would be for bringing the dispatch in-house and the technology costs, and then used IMSA's budget as a basis for what it would cost us to run the operation, I think it's anticipated that those costs are included of what it would cost us to transition over.
But we're going to have to hire X number of people to staff the Fire model.
Yes, so there would be some internal administrative
costs.
That's
going to be a cost.
That are costs that we've already, it would be additional work for the staff. We wouldn't hire more people to be able to do that. Staff would take on, existing staff would take on that responsibility to do the hiring.
So you're saying that the conversion cost is kind of de minimis?
Right.
Okay. But then my second point, and I know whether you're going to speak to this, is there's been an assumption made that we're going to acquire all the ambulances for basically nothing.
Yes. At this point, as Fire did their analysis, they were assuming that there would be an agreement with Tulsa and that the IMSA board would agree that we would dissolve the trust. And if the trust was dissolved, the portion of assets that belonged to the city would go to the city. And so that was considered, and that was stated up front, that if that didn't happen, that's an unknown factor as to what we would be able to do. And legal has advised us that we would be at risk of not having our assets if Tulsa didn't pull out and there was an agreement on the dissolving of the trust. So that is not incorporated in the analysis, but it's a risk that was there in the conversion if we were going to do that.
So do we know today at 9/21 on this date whether or not we can get the ambulances at no cost or not?
We do not know that.
And that would seem to be a significant deal breaker if we could not.
Yeah, it's not just Tulsa, as I understand it. The entire trust, which includes representatives of the non-beneficiary cities, would have to agree to let us have that equipment. Meaning, in Oklahoma City, that would be, of course, we have an Edmond representative on the trust that would have to agree to it also.
And my recollection is that had to be unanimous.
That's correct.
On behalf of everybody involved.
All the trustees have to approve, both beneficiaries have to approve, and then when you're transferring the individual assets of each division, all creditors of that division have to approve, and that would include your non-beneficiary jurisdiction. They're considered creditors under the trust indenture.
That trust was written not to be broken, apparently, and I think that's maybe a larger issue is how the city got into this situation, and maybe can look at in the future. I think it's largely academic because of those situations just elucidated and because of Tulsa's actions. But I'll just ask for academic purposes. You've considered in your analysis the $2.5 million that goes to Paramedics Plus that would be saved. You've eliminated that $2.5 million and considered that a cost savings.
I'm sorry, the $2.5 million for...
That's in IMSA's expenses category. He simply put their numbers.
All right.
When you're talking about fire department, they would not have included that if they didn't. They're not going to contract.
Okay, so that $2.5 million that we're paying to Paramedics Plus has already been factored in.
Yes.
As has the salaries, the $764,000 in salaries of officers and et cetera. All that's been factored into the fire model.
Well, it's not in the fire model. The fire model is based upon not having those expenses. That's based, those are expenses of the IMSA model and included in that IMSA model.
Right.
We're contrasting that with the fire model that does not have those expenses, but has other expenses. And so if you take a look at it, depending upon whose assumptions you agree with on the staffing,
I just want to make that's $3.25 million in savings. I just want to make that's in the fire model, right? In the fire model numbers.
They do not include those costs.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Based on the trust, what would you take to the trust to convince them that there should be a break, to dissolve the trust for the purpose of Oklahoma City? It seems like that we're talking about a whole lot of...
It'd be difficult because there's no financial incentive for the rest of the trustees to agree to give us our assets.
So why did we do all of this?
Because
I don't understand when we got a legal binding trust agreement that you can clearly see it's a concrete trust.
Right.
That you don't go talking about doing things outside of the trust if the trust and the trustees haven't reached some type of agreement or either presented it themselves to the municipality.
Okay, I think the answer is that we have a 5-year window of opportunity to take a look at this, and so we've historically looked, and this year again looked at the pros and cons of doing so. There is a risk of doing that. It was very close 5 years ago of Tulsa pulling out. Matter of fact, I was of the opinion one time that they were going to pull out 5 years ago. Well, if that happens, then it's a different animal going forward. This year, Tulsa chose early to make the statement that they are not pulling out, and maybe we should have reevaluated at that point in time whether we wanted to go forward, but we were going down the road and went through the full due diligence on the reevaluation.
If I could ask a quick question, a clarification of Kenny, because I think he had this in his memo, but they're not saying we can't get out of the trust. You can not participate in the trust at the end of the current 5-year period, but if you're expecting to bring something from the trust is when you're talking about having to get the agreement. But if the city or Tulsa, either one, just says, you know, at the end of this current 5 years, we're going to walk away. Well, you can do that, but it's going to cost you to totally rebuild a brand new system.
I think that's correct. I think you have a window of opportunity, it calls it. So you could say, well, we're exercising the window and we're not going to participate in the trust anymore, and then do your own ambulance service. But to actually dissolve the trust and get the assets out of the trust itself to use for your own service, you're going to have all the conditions met to dissolve the trust and transfer the assets.
Councilman Greenwell.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Skip. I think this is a very punitive arrangement. Now, and I'm sorry for not knowing the history of it, but it could have been a situation coming out of the old AmCare system that everybody involved thought that we have to have such punitive language to keep everyone together, and so let's all agree to this because the old system was so bad. But having said that, maybe now we need to look to prepare for the next 5 years to begin negotiating the terms of that trust agreement to where it's not as punitive going forward, maybe now's not the time, especially since Tulsa's already indicated they want to stay with it. They're probably not too likely to modify the provisions at this point in time. But over the next 5 years, I think we need to reconsider and possibly meet with Tulsa and the other municipalities to see if we could modify the terms of the trust to make it less punitive if any of the partners, any of the participants decided to pull out of the trust. Maybe now the system is so much more stable that if one party should decide to leave, it's not as negative of an impact on the remaining parties. And if that's the case, then we should remove the punitive language that currently exists. I think we forfeit not only the equipment, but any cash, any accounts receivable, any unbilled time. There's probably a lot of assets within the trust that technically we are part owners of that we forfeit should we pull out. I think it's a fairly big number. But anyway, I don't think we can do anything at this point in time, but it should be something that over the next 5 years we begin to negotiate with all the parties to look at removing some of the punitive provisions of this trust agreement.
You're exactly right, and I think it's a good historical note that when AmCare gave the city notice here in Oklahoma City that it was dissolving, it was very short notice. And IMSA existed in Tulsa, what we know as the Eastern Division. That existed up there long before we joined up. And the city leaders at the time here, when AmCare gave us that notice, approached Tulsa about creating a trust so that you'd have an Eastern and a Western Division. So I wasn't in the room at that time, so I don't know what the tenor of the negotiations were, but the conditions of the trust were set when Oklahoma City approached Tulsa to come in at that point in time. Now, the trust has been, if I'm not mistaken, little modifications have been made to the trust over the years for different things. So I don't think it's unheard of that you could get the trust to relook at the trust agreement, if you wanted to approach Tulsa about doing that and so forth. But, the historical perspective of we asked to join up, and that's what brought the agreement that we have currently.
Well, and I do think we've gained some real benefit by this conversation in the sense that we have discovered that there is the ability to merge the dispatch system and to realize from either perspective some good savings and efficiencies. So, whether or not we've been able to, make a giant leap forward, I think we really have made some progress in saving some dollars from the cities.
So the purpose of this whole, exercise was to identify the opportunities and obstacles to changing. I think we've done a good job of this. This trust situation is a genuine obstacle to making a change right now. But I think we have the opportunity during the next 5 years to see if we can renegotiate the trust to make it more certain that the conclusion that we're going to get all their ambulances at no charge is a realistic assumption to make in a presentation. I don't think that realism is here today, but I do think this exercise, I know I wasn't aware of how restricted the trust was, and it's from the comments made here this morning, several of my colleagues weren't either. But it is a genuine obstacle to changing the system right now. But we've got 5 years. We get that trust changed. We can negotiate with the city of Tulsa and the other members. If there's some incentive we can present to them after some studies made, then that gives us just that much more power to go to them. But I think that this exercise did exactly what it was intended to do. We identified the opportunities. We confirmed that the assumptions made in both financial estimates were reasonable. I think that's important. It's up to us to look at the numbers now and make that decision. But I do think that the trust situation and the possible restriction on our ability to get those ambulances back is a significant obstacle to changing right now. And in 5 years, we'll have the same opportunity again, hopefully.
And so from such a procedure, I'm sorry, Pete.
No,
please go ahead.
Go ahead. You were.
Please go ahead.
Okay. This occurred to me 5 years ago, not quite with the gravity that it's hit us today, but it occurred to me 5 years ago that the trust was going to be difficult to get out of. I think what's happened this time is these proposals are much closer together than they were 5 years ago. I think Fire, to its credit, has listened to what happened 5 years ago and the things that we talked about that made their proposal very difficult. They've made a proposal, I think, that's pretty hard to say no to. But I think the problem is twofold. It doesn't have, assuming based on what you're telling us, that the finances, the information we were shown financially is adequate. It's fair and it's reasonable. We can't do this. This window is not a window at all this time. As Pat points out, we've had a great discussion, but it's not a window of opportunity to get out, because with the trust being the way it is, there's no possible way that all these beneficiaries and member cities are going to say it's okay for us to take half the assets and walk away. It's just not going to happen. But one of the things I think we ought to do, and this occurred to me 5 years ago also, is that instead of making this a contest, that we have these competing proposals, in the interim we ought to do some work on it. We shouldn't wait until 5 years from now, and we ought to look at the trust, but we also ought to look at internally the idea that as part of the competing proposals, we're talking about doing something with dispatch. That should have been done 5 years ago. That's something that should not have waited. That's a cost savings that and we've got a great internal audit system ourselves. Perhaps we could commission them to take a look from a business perspective at what cost savings are available to us under the current system. So it's not so much of a gotcha kind of a thing, where it's a business decision. It's not a competition the way it's been designed. And then we also need to work on the trust, because we can't change the trust. It's not a window of opportunity to do anything other than to talk about it, because there's no way that any one of the member cities, if they get to vote, if they get a veto power over it, it has to be unanimous. There's no way. What in their interest possibly would they agree to let us out?
Since they approved 2 trustees, you're essentially going to have to go into it with everyone agreed that some other system would be a better system to use to provide ambulance service.
I mean, there are other reasons to make that decision, probably.
Well, there are other reasons to stay with it. One is it's probably the best example of regionalization we've got going for us. I mean, if we all, and I believe that the duplication of services is probably the worst, the biggest cost to maintaining government we have, is the fact we have so many duplicated services. But I think looking at it from a standpoint of how could we make it better during the 5-year period instead of waiting for people to make proposals to us would make more sense. But I would say this, that we wouldn't be having this conversation if these proposals weren't much better this year than they were 5 years ago. The fire system actually is very responsive to the comments that were made around this horseshoe 5 years ago. It's a much better proposal.
So it seems like the most important concrete thing that we can get done and should get done as fast as possible is consolidating dispatch, getting the CAD-to-CAD interface system going. And so while we're on the topic, if I could just hear briefly from Chief Bryant, and maybe if there's someone from IT, because I know that we've struggled, this has been ongoing for a long time. I'd just like to know, what are the obstacles to getting the CAD-to-CAD interface going? What is the timeline for bringing this online? If I could just hear that briefly.
Sure. Well, Chief Bryant's coming up here. I want to point out that the first thing we did was combining the Emergency Communications Center and making room for EMSA dispatch when that opened up 4 or 5 years ago, that did have those 2 dispatch functions in the same building. And so that was the first step we made toward making this happen. Chief?
Well, exactly. The CAD software that's compatible and can interface with Fire's CAD software, that's been purchased a long time ago by IMSA. They've been in the process of implementing that on their side. The most recent information I had is that there was an agreement document that was being hashed out between the city and IMSA as far as certain agreements that would be made as far as this interface was concerned. And now, and Steve can even speak to it from his side of it, is that we're beginning to do some testing of that. So it's moving along, and it's closer than it has been in some time, I think, and maybe because of where we're at right now and some of the discussions we've been having over the summer. It's kind of helped move that along a little bit. But so that's kind of currently where we're at. Steve, is that...
Can you just, Chief, can you just talk briefly, how do you see this evolving? What, if you get the CAD-to-CAD interface online, what, and you got some direction from council, let's say that we didn't want call, what calls would fire no longer go on? And what calls would they continue to go to?
Well, our EMS office has been working with the medical director's office over the past few years as far as identifying from a list. And so we would still probably go on the higher priority calls. Again, if we're able to look through those a little bit better, we get that information at the same time. We get updates to our units, just like EMSA gets updates to their units as far as when they get additional information. That all goes into what we respond on and what we don't. But as I said in my presentation in July, we believe we can reduce our total call volume by as much as about 20% by going to this system, because again, we can eliminate some of the non-emergency or lower priority calls that we're currently responding to.
So that's about 20,000. Would you agree with this 20,000 calls a year number?
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to all priority one calls, and what else?
Well, again, I think a lot of it has to do with the information that we receive from the caller. So probably, obviously, the higher priority calls, and again, just depending on the circumstances from the information that we get from the caller would make that determination. But we already have, and Major Blocker? Because he's been our EMS officer working with the medical director's office, so I'm going to let him speak to exactly probably how that breaks down.
Thanks. We have, and for some time, have had an agreement with the medical director and with EMSA on the type of calls that we should and should not be responding on. So that's already done. Once we get to that point, we may tweak that a little bit more when we see some maybe we still don't need to, or some that we should. But there's already a system in place that we both agree on. It's just where we're waiting for everything to come together is that we get the information quick enough that we can wait to determine if it meets if it meets our response priority or not. Right now, we're not always getting the information in a quick enough time where we're not really seen as first responders. On the other side, in Tulsa, where they do wait for that information, EMSA's on scene before fire the majority of the time. Here we don't wait, and we're on the scene first the majority of the time. And there's going to be a delay. There's going to be a delay, but it's going to be down to more acceptable, where we're getting the information on the most critical, in 15 seconds or so, and some of the more criticals within 30 seconds. And there's not the longer delays where somebody is maybe 2 blocks from a fire station and they have to wait for a paramedic with all of the equipment for 5 minutes because we didn't get the call in time. But we've already determined what those, and there's agreement on what those are. And this CAD-to-CAD interface will speed that process where we will have that minimum delays, and we can get there in the quickest time and be first do the service we're supposed to do to the citizen. We can be first responders and get there.
Wouldn't the central dispatch solve most of that just in and of itself?
Yeah, there's other efficiencies too that we can help the transport agency that goes back a long way. So if it's a call that we normally don't respond to but has a potential of getting critical, and we know that an EMSA unit is 10, 15 minutes away, we may go ahead and send an ALS unit, but we have to have that communication all the time to use our resources in the most efficient manner. So we're not over-responding, but we can help them fill holes once in a while, and another time we're only responding to the most critical calls that we're designed to respond to.
Is there anyone from the IT department here that could speak to the timeline and obstacles?
Councilman, I visited with our CAD, our IT staff this morning. As we speak right now, our IT staff, the TriTech staff, and TriTech is the company that wrote the software, are working on finalizing the configuration of the interface that will let IMSA's CAD and fire department's CAD, police CAD speak to one another. At this time, they believe they'll have that completed today, and they'll go into the testing mode today. Of course, the biggest issue is how does that interface work? Will there be problems, other areas that we're not anticipating? So that will be tested in an offline environment for a period of time. And then once they've completed the testing in the offline environment and feel like it's functioning okay, then they will test it in the actual environment for a period of time to make sure that everything is working okay, that the information is transferring well, and then once we get all of that done, then we will do a go live on that process. Again, the timeline on that, last I heard is that they would hope to be able to get that up and running before the end of this calendar year.
Great.
Okay. So, Manager, then can you share with us from a procedural standpoint where we go from here?
I can. What we're planning on doing is bringing back a resolution for consideration by council next week that would formalize the decision to stay with IMSA because of the fact that there's a potential risk on the dissolving of the capital issue that's out there. I also believe that the revenue risk is something to be considered. I think we've agreed that the costs are very similar. There's an honest disagreement as to the staffing levels as we go forward. And then as part of that resolution, I was anticipating having the council direct that we move expeditiously toward the resolving the dispatching issue.
Anybody have any further questions? Councilman McAtee?
Yeah, I could be totally wrong. I come from an IT background many, many years ago. I personally think that the IT portion of this can be relatively quickly resolved. You're talking about by the end of the year, so I would accept that timeline. But I think there's something that also needs to be kept in mind, and that is the whole deal of the model that we intend to move forward for the next 5 years. Right now, our first responder model calls for fire to be first at the scene, and that's why they're there first at the scene. Having ridden with fire, there are many occasions where once fire gets there, there is no need for transport even to show up. And then the converse is also true. There are times when it's absolutely necessary that IMSA get there in the most expeditious manner. That's what I'm calling an operational challenge, and that has to be, I think, worked out between the medical control staff, the dispatchers, and IMSA and the fire. And I see that as a much more evolving discussion that has to go on, and I think needs to be included in our direction to both entities. That's what we want to do. From my point of view, that's what we want to do, come up with that best model for our clientele out there.
Councilman Kelly.
Well, first of all, I would like to commend staff, chief, and Assistant Manager Berry and the other officer. You know, to be able to respond on such a unnoticed timing of this issue, and then to provide us with the information that you just provided us, it sounds like that they're doing everything that we're sitting around here talking about in reference to trying to improve the system. And you know, and they are clear about the fact that there is not a fight between the two agencies, that all our first responders agencies are trying to interface a program, and the software is being in place, is being inputted today, or as he stated there, as we speak. And so it sounds like that we may not have had the knowledge of what's already being done to improve this whole system. And just from what I just heard, it sounds like it's going to be something that we can be proud of as far as a working solution of this issue. I mean, I believe that a whole lot of the issues in reference to when we talk about both fire and IMSA appearing at the same time. Obviously, a lot of that over the years has to be about how the information is received. And once you can get a clarification from the beginning as it relates to what is the problem and who really needs to appear there, I think we have a solution to that issue that's going to work, you know. So I applaud all of the staff for being able to respond to the questions that, you know, you didn't have notice that you were going to be on the agenda to. And the poor man, as I say, the presentation that was done, I think we kind of kicked him to the curb.
Any further, Councilman Morris?
Just a couple of things. I would suggest that all of the council that has not had a chance to sit in that dispatch center get over there and spend some time, because it's easy to think of it being a simple process until you get over in that center and you see what happens with technology changes and everything else that goes on. You need to see how the operation is and how they suspect it will be at some point before you start trying to get your mind set on how difficult this is or how easy it is. Having been in this world all of my career, basically, there's a lot of things that go on in a relationship like this, and it is much better now than it has ever been before. But that doesn't mean that there's not the challenges of two organizations that are very professional and love what they do, meeting those challenges. A couple of things I'd like to have. Back in my era, Jim, we started purchasing equipment with our subsidy and leasing it to IMSA so that we could own the equipment in case it ever happens what we're talking about today. I was surprised to find out recently that that's not the case anymore. I'd like some information on when that was changed and what the logic or the legal reason is that we don't do that any longer. And secondly, Kenny, if you could research changes, amendments that we've made to the trust in the past and what they might have been. They may have been simple clerical situations or something, but if you could give us some history of when that has happened and how it happened, would give some insight as we move forward on our possibility of amending the trust as we go forward.
Sure.
Great. Anything further?
Mayor, I would just like to make sure a point that a clarification. When I gave the estimation of the end of the year, that is the best case scenario. If we run into problems as we try to integrate these systems and have them communicate with one another, then it could be longer than that. So that would be our best case scenario.
Okay. Phil, I see you standing here. Would you like to make some comments?
Sorry about my tardiness. Do you still need my yellow slip? Or is that
I think so. If you just give your name and address for the record, please.
It's Phil Sipe, President of Firefighters Local 157. I think this discussion is excellent, and this is exactly what we need to have. Councilman McAfee talked about going to the fire station. I know for a fact he went to 24s. The guys called me over there. They talked to me about him coming and riding the rig and doing that for several hours. I would encourage all of council to do that. That gives you a much better grasp of what's going on out there, because all his comments were very appropriate about there are calls that we're responding on that we really don't need to be going on. If there's anything that comes from this discussion, I think it needs to be about how we can create better efficiency in the system, reduce cost, and try to bring the call volume under control. I don't know if y'all have looked at the numbers lately, but we're on pace to respond to about 89,000 calls this year. We did 83,000 last year. That's a significant increase. Mr. Williamson's proposal, he brought up the issue about the baby boomers. That's very true. That's increasing our call volume rapidly as our aging population grows older and older. We're going to see more and more call volume from that. And I think that's going to be, that's a very serious issue, because we have some first-in districts right now at some of the stations where they're literally on their feet from the time they get there in the morning till they leave the next day, a significant number of shifts throughout the year. That's an issue. I was looking online on Wikipedia doing some research about fire department responses, and the latest numbers from New York City, 2010 numbers, indicated the top 10 engine companies in that city didn't respond to anywhere near the number of calls that Engine 25 responded to last year. Engine 25 responded to a lot more calls than any of those top 10 engine companies in New York City. We have serious issues here, and this discussion, I think, is very healthy. The fire relocation study that you guys commissioned in 2006, it had a chart in there, and it showed, I think, different call volumes that it projected. We are well past the highest call volume that's on that chart, well past that, years ahead of that. And so this is a growing issue. I would encourage council to continue this kind of discussion. We would love to be involved in that, try to come up with solutions on how to reduce that call volume. There was one issue that came up during the EMSA's proposal about self-dispatching. Just to clarify that, I think it would be helpful to know that self-dispatching, as it occurs today, is not a number that's added to the call volume numbers you get. That 89,000 calls that you get is not going to include self-dispatching, because self-dispatching generally occurs when an officer hears a call on the radio, he's on an emergency call already, another unit's already been dispatched from much farther away, because it's in, and it may be a call that's only 2 blocks away from where they are, and he can't get away at that moment in time, but it may be 30 seconds or a minute and a half later he can get away. So he calls dispatch and says, I'll take that call. And he goes on it. Well, there's still just one call. That's one incident number that the original unit was assigned to and now is going back to the station, and then his unit's going to be assigned to it. So I think there's a little bit of misconception there, or maybe a miscommunication. It maybe is completely unattended. But self-dispatching does not add 20,000, or will not reduce our call volume by 20,000. In fact, if it added a new incident number, that 83,000 calls we responded to last year would be 103,000. If in fact it would add as much as 20,000 calls. So you guys need to understand that self-dispatching is not inflating our call volume. Every call originates at the 911 center. It's assigned an incident number, and those numbers are what's reported to you as a council. So this is a serious issue. I would love to be a part of a committee or a study committee or whatever you guys want to put together to try to come up with some solutions. I think the CAD interface issue is very important. I'm glad to hear you talking about that. But that's really all I have to say today, and I really appreciate this conversation and y'all's focus on this issue, because it is a growing issue for both police and fire. And we've got to get these call volumes under control, because our personnel are really working very, very hard, and their call volume and their hard work is increasing every single year. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and we really do appreciate the hard work of everybody involved. This was a very important process to go through, and I'd like to just echo the comments. I think everybody worked really hard to put together great packages. They were very close this year, Councilman White, and led to some really great discussions, so thank you very much. I think I'm closing in on a record of getting to item 4 on the agenda at 10 o'clock, so let's see if we can't move the meeting forward a little bit. Item 4 is the Journal of Council Proceedings, to receive the Journal for October 4th, 2011, and to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for September 27th, 2011.
Second.
Second. Cast your votes. Item passes unanimously. And item 5 is request for uncontinued contingency. I'm cold. A request for uncontested continuances. Mr. Manager.
Madam Vice Mayor, we have several this morning, starting on page 9 under item 8B1, item A, 1021 Southwest Binkley, west of that be stricken, the owner's removed. Item G, 3636 Northwestern, west of that be stricken, the owner has removed. Item I, 1600 Northeast 21st, west of that be stricken, there's a new owner. Under item 8C1, item E, 7019 Littlewood Lane, west of that be stricken, the owner secured. Item F, 1713 East Madison, west of that be stricken, owner secured. Item H, 1600 North Pennsylvania, west of that be stricken, owner secured. Item L, 2520 Southeast 45th, west of that be stricken. We need to re-notify for additional violations. And item R, 821 Northwest 89th Street, west of that be stricken, to rework for additional violations. And then under claims for denial, item 8 G1C, Edgemere Park, we asked that that be deferred for 1 week until October 18th. And item 8G1G, the claim of Chad Trogdon, we asked that that be deferred for 2 weeks to allow for more time to investigate.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now recess the council meeting and convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. We have 2 items today. Second, record your votes. Passes unanimously. We'll adjourn OCMFA and convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. I just wanted to make one quick comment, and this kind of flows through a number of items on the agenda. We need to ask staff manager, please ask staff to pay very close attention to the redistricting issues. There are a number of items as we run through here. Pete, I saw Fire Station 7 was still listed as Ward 6, and so there are a number of things here in...
We will be more diligent in the future. The redistricting took place 10 days ago.
10 days ago, great. Thank you very much. So under the PPA, we have 4 items. Second, thank you. Please record your votes. Passes unanimously. Adjourn the OCPPA, and we will reconvene the council meeting with a consent docket. Any individual considerations today? Pat Ryan, you're going to disappoint me.
It's okay.
Hearing none. Skip, do you have something? Microphone.
I was trying to find out the number 1, A1.
Item A1 is an ABC license. It's an introduction to be set for final hearing on November 1st.
Is this from last week?
No.
No.
All right, this is not, it's no problem.
Okay.
I'm okay.
If then everybody would record your votes. Items passed unanimously. Moving on to the concurrence docket, there are 11 items today. Most of them relate to the Maps for Kids Trust and a couple from the PPA. And on the concurrence docket, any individual consideration? Record your votes, please. Items passed unanimously. Moving on to item 8 then, these are items requiring separate votes. And item 8A is a public hearing regarding the ordinance related to nuisances, which amends Article 6 of Chapter 35 of the Oklahoma City Municipal Code. We had a presentation last week from Chief City with regard to this, and so our vote today, is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak to this? Okay, so a yes vote today moves it on to final vote for next week. Cast your votes, please. Item passes unanimously. Item 8B is a public hearing regarding dilapidated structures. Vicki or Francis, do we have anybody here to speak to any of these items? Second, record your votes. Items passed unanimously. Item 8C is a public hearing regarding unsecured structures and a resolution declaring those items unsecured. Is there anyone here to speak to any of those items? Second, cast your votes. Items passed unanimously. Item D, 8D, is a revocable permit with Mesta Park Neighborhood Association to hold the Mesta Fest October 15th, 2011 in Mesta Park. I unfortunately will not be here to attend. It's a wonderful event, and so I'd request a motion to approve. Second, please cast your votes. Motion passes unanimously. Item E1 is a resolution approving the request for salary continuation, and I understand that this request meets all of our criteria. And Kenny, we don't need executive session for this?
Correct.
Second, cast your votes, please. Passes unanimously. Item 8F is a resolution approving the sale of the Broadway Kerr parking garage located at 1 Robert S. Kerr by the Central Oklahoma Transportation and Parking Authority, and the redemption or defeasance of the bonds related to that facility. And Manager, I thought you might give us a brief.
Absolutely. COPTA put out RFPs regarding some parking garages a couple of years ago, and that resulted in the sale of both the east and west city central garages, the one that ended up being the Devon purchased and added to, and then the other one was next to it on the east side was sold to the Bedford Oliver Partnership downtown. At the time we requested these RFPs, Sandridge also had submitted an RFP on the Broadway Kerr garage, but we focused on the other two because of the imminent development that was occurring on those garages. Subsequent to them, we've been working on this garage. The value is in excess of $8 million for the facility. The value to Sandridge is that they now have this garage, which brings security for their complex and helps enable them for the growth of their complex. The value of this to the city of Oklahoma City is this will allow us to pay off all our debt. And COPTA will now be debt-free. And we are doing a parking study and looking at other areas of downtown as well, a parking study. But this will allow us, if we our desire is to go and to construct other parking structures in different parts of downtown, if so desired. We do have other parking structures in the COPTA inventory, if you will, that do provide cash flow. COPTA is in a very strong financial position now. Those remaining garages include the Sheridan Walker garage, the Santa Fe garage, Century Center garage, and the Cox Center garage, along with multiple surface lots that they have throughout downtown. Be happy to answer any questions the councils have. We're handling these and running these through the same procedures that we did when we disposed of the other two garages.
Councilman White, I saw Councilman White come on, and then
My comments
Councilman
are more philosophical, really, than they are practical, because I'm not sure I understand the value of being debt-free if you have to sell an asset to do that. But it seems to me that we've been in the parking business a long time, which I've always thought tended to be a little schizophrenic, to be in the parking business at the same time you're in the bus business. Seems to me they're kind of counterproductive, and I've made that argument several times. But when the city invests in parking garages like this and nurses this parking garage through all the times that it wasn't valuable to anybody, but the public sector couldn't see fit to do it, then once it gets to a certain point, then it's now at a point where the public sector wants it. There's just something about that doesn't ring equitable to me. I mean, is that the city's role to build garages at times when nobody else will build them, and then when they get to be profitable or when they get to be desirable, then we sell them off to the very people we built them for in the first place? It just seems I mean, it may be a good idea, but there's just something about it that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, we talk about running the city like a business. Well, if I owned something and I built it and I nursed it through a period of time when it wasn't profitable or wasn't desirable by somebody else, and then it became profitable, I'm not sure I would be just willing to sell it just so I'd be debt-free. This is not really a comment, really. Again, I'm going to vote for it because I think that's where the train's headed. But philosophically, I'm not sure I understand that ought to be the role of government, to build the thing in the first place. If it was a good deal then, I don't know why it's not a good deal for us now. I'm tortured by the various aspects of it.
Councilman Ryan.
The model you talk about is not unfamiliar to the business community. Start a business, make it profitable, and sell it off. That's not unusual at all. So, but the question I have is a little less philosophical.
Well, if you're selling it off for a profit, if you're selling it off for a profit, if you're selling it for what you owe on it, that may or may not be the
We don't
model.
have to make payments then. The question I have is less philosophical than it is practical. If this sale goes through, will the Sandridge employees occupy the entire garage?
The answer to that is no. They don't
Will it
need-
still be open to the public then?
We've agreed to a 24-month period in which they will open that to the parkers that are there now. That doesn't mean after 24 months, they may, at their option, choose to extend that, but they are not obligated to go beyond that 24 months.
At the end of
to provide
24
that
months, it
parking.
could be a private parking garage solely for the employees of Sandridge.
I didn't...
Excuse me, at the end of 24 months?
Yes.
It could be a private parking garage.
Yes, sir.
Now, do we have a firm offer from Sandridge?
A firm offer? We have a signed contract.
I know, but is the negotiation process going on the terms or the value?
Well, the negotiation process, I believe, has been completed on all aspects of it.
Okay, so we've got a dollar value in mind, and so this here, the negotiations are in process right now. That's sort of a historical fact that negotiations are completed.
That's really correct. There were a lot of factors that went into the negotiation.
And sometime in the near future, the city council will get an opportunity to approve that contract.
This is authorizing COP to dispose of the asset, so it will go to COP for
this essentially
disposition.
is
This is
approving
identical
the
to
sale
how
of
we
the
did the other
garage.
two.
Councilman Greenwald.
Yes. Jim, can you tell me the percentage of usage at this particular parking garage? I mean, is it 80% utilized, 90%?
I think it looks better. But before we get to that, can I go back to, we do have a value amount. We're not trying to hide anything on that. It's $8-point-some million. If you can answer that question. It's a clearly negotiated amount based upon the appraisals, and then we discounted it because of some capital improvements that need to be done to the facility. So it's $8-point-some million, and Rick can then answer.
It's $8,600,000 and about $85,000 is the bottom line price that we're paying on this. Our appraisal came in at $9 million. We made an adjustment because of some maintenance that needs to be done in the garage that came out of a facility condition report that we just had completed for every garage in our system, and so we made allowances for that, and that's how we established the price.
My question was percentage of utilization.
Yeah, right now, that garage has consistently been in the upper 80% range. I will tell you that right now we put up about 1,000, just under 1,100 spaces for monthly parkers in there. The garage actually has about 900 spaces. We always have an oversell percentage because we know every day not everybody comes and parks in that garage. There's about 480 non-Sandridge parkers in that facility right now.
There is some commercial space in the building. Will that be allowed to stay?
That commercial, those leases that are there, the Sandridge is assuming those leases as they exist right now. Now, I will tell you that one of the large lease occupants is Devon, and Devon will be relocating from that facility, obviously, as they complete their structure.
Is Triangle A&E still in?
Yes, they're still there.
How long is their lease for? Do you know, Rick?
I'm going to tell you off the top of my head, I think it's a month-to-month lease, and it's been that way for a long, long time.
What's the utilization in general of all downtown parking, would you say?
Averagely, it's about 87%.
So that's fairly high. And at what point in time would we build a new parking garage?
Well, the rule of thumb would tell you that when we get into the upper 80s, it's time to be looking at another structure, and that's why COPPA commissioned a parking study to be done in the downtown area, which includes not only Bricktown, but Automobile Alley, Midtown, and the Central Business District. I'm anticipating that we'll have the final report on that probably early November. We actually are reviewing a draft today.
Okay, thank you.
In the overall macro look at downtown parking, there's been several changes over the last few years. The county built a parking garage with OG&E a few years ago, and then Devon took the central garage that they took and added 2,000 parking spaces to that. And then with Project 180, we're adding several hundred additional on-street parking spaces downtown. So that all falls into the equation. And then, of course, we're doing the parking study, as Mr. Kane alluded to.
I think Councilman White brings up a really good point. This is maybe a good time to review our philosophy towards the city providing parking downtown. Is that a legitimate role of city government to do? I think we need to have that discussion. Thank you, Councilman.
I was going to say the same thing. The study is going to show the need, not necessarily the need just for public park, for a public entity to own it. It will just show need for parking.
Correct.
So a private entity could be involved in building a parking structure.
Absolutely, and we know that there are discussions going on right now of a couple of private parties talking about building parking facilities. So that is a piece of the study that was included.
But what's the annual revenue of this parking garage?
Boy, off the top of my head, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Roughly.
I'm going to say $800,000, probably. But I'll have to get the exact number, but I believe that's about where it is.
But that serviced the debt on the garage, or the debt on all the garages?
It doesn't service the debt on all the garages. I mean, it obviously contributes to that, but it's just a piece of the overall. Our overall debt's about $2 million.
It's a combined system.
And Councilman White, I said it's always been my business objective to get out of debt, too. I really feel a whole lot better. I sleep better at night when I'm out of debt as well. Do we have a motion on this item? Second. Cast your votes, please. Passes unanimously. Item 8G are claims recommended for denial. Do we have anyone here today to speak to that claim, any of these claims? No, do we have a motion? Second. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. And item 9 are claims recommended for approval. We have just one today. Anyone here to speak? Thank you. Second. Cast your votes. Approved unanimously. Item 10, items from council. And Councilman Ryan, item A is, you'd like to introduce, please?
Thank you very much. This is a resolution that was put together some weeks ago and been revised several times since the original draft. And its intent now and originally was to reduce some of the demands on staff time. As you are well aware, at every city council meeting, we have representatives, senior representatives of the city staff standing by next door to answer questions, which is a valuable service. But by going to an every other week schedule, why we would free them up at least from that responsibility half the time. And that was the original intent of this. I had one of my colleagues suggest that we needed to do more analysis on this before we went forward. And rather than do an analysis, I'm proposing this as a test for the 2 months remaining in the year, November and December, to see if indeed we have problems dealing with the city's business that is a responsibility of the city council. I want to make it clear that I'm not suggesting the city shuts down every other Tuesday. The city offices will be open. The city council will be available for special meetings if we have issues come up during that time. This resolution can be rescinded at any point in time. If after a month we feel it's a disaster, we did something wrong, we sweep it off the table. I would like to see it in place for 2 months to test my theory that we make additional staff time available without having an adverse effect on the public's business. Now, we've had some discussion with the Planning Commission staff because that's an area where we may have some problems. But I think since we do it successfully during the summer months, there's no reason we can't do it successfully during the rest of the year. I think what this may cause us to do is to look at some of our processes to make sure they're as efficient as possible, that we're not doing something just because we've always done it that way. Anyway, I offer for your consideration this resolution that would put us on an every other week schedule for the rest of the year as a test. And at the end of that time, we can decide as the council whether we want to continue with that schedule or go back to our original schedule. If we go back to our original schedule, then there's some additional things we need to do. But I think as a test, this gives us a chance to look firsthand, real life, real-time situation as what happens if we go to this every other schedule. I move the adoption of the resolution.
Second. Questions, comments, discussion? Reagan.
I'm going to... I think council needs to understand that if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't do a study and I haven't asked for one, but if I'm not mistaken, during our summer schedule, we did not have a meeting or very few meetings that we didn't have to defer items because we didn't get to them in time. And that's because of the nature of, we like to get through before lunch, and plus the fact that there are trust and commissions that meet at 1 o'clock on Tuesdays and so forth. So I think I'm not going to vote for this. I'm going to vote against it. The city staff that sits back here doesn't mean that their departments are not working. There are all the department heads, and with the smartphones and the iPads and cell phones and internet and everything else doesn't mean that if they're needed for a question or whatever, doesn't mean that they're not doing it. But I think the burden on the planning, the payroll, the paying our city bills, the zoning cases that come up, some of those things, the timing and so forth, and I really don't understand the need for it. In fact, I don't know that I understand the need to do the summertime. If a council person needs to take a vacation, they can take a vacation. They just miss that council meeting. But to block out the summer like that, I don't know that anyway, that's off on another subject. But I will say this, if I am the lone no vote and this passes, I would caution all council people to understand that means you're going to be here, could be here potentially on Tuesdays for a long time. And not to get antsy towards the end of the meeting, to not say we need to get out of here, or I've got another meeting. You're going to have to quit booking those meetings, right around lunch, because it's historically we've shown that you're not going to make them anyway. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Councilman Greenwell.
Thank you. Well, the idea sounds appealing, but the recent meeting that we had that extended past 1 o'clock made it not as appealing, as at least to me. And just as a possibility, Pat, would you consider maybe instead of every other week, having one Tuesday a month where we would be absent, and then we could schedule certain types of presentations like we had this morning to occur at a time when it's not immediately after that week that we're off, and just try it that way, because I agree with Gary. I do think it tends to build the amount of issues that we have to look at to a point where we become less effective towards the end of the meetings when they go past 11 and 12 at times. So I do like it, but I think I would probably be more inclined to looking at a possibility of just dropping one Tuesday a month. That would still give us 3 weeks to meet, and we could just schedule meetings and the various reports at a time to where they don't that they occur after not after the meeting that we've missed, just to smooth things out.
Just one comment. The purpose of the resolution isn't to free up the council. We've always had the opportunity, as Gary pointed out, if we had a conflict, go someplace else. This was intended to reduce demands on the staff time. And I hope the staff in the next room is paying attention to what's going on in here during discussions rather than talking to somebody on their iPhone. But that's another thing. David, I think your suggestion is interesting, but I don't think it gets to the heart of the matter of what I was trying to do, and that is reduce staff time. The council, I come down here almost every day of the week anyway. I think that this extra Tuesday would give us a chance to spend more time with our constituents, and I think it's got some benefits. But I made a promise to myself when I came in this morning I wasn't going to enter into a long debate in support of this thing. I'm going to put it out. I have a high regard for the intellect and the dedication of my colleagues up here, and I know they'll do what's right.
Councilman McAtee.
Respectfully, Pat, I'm going to have to vote against this. I think the experience of the last several weeks showed the need to have regular council meetings on a weekly basis to discuss the important issues. I'm disappointed, for example, that the downtown housing study, which we were unable to get to, which I think has a significant philosophical and political implications for the future, will give Councilman White some more heartburn over the public buying things and then turning them over to the private enterprise later on, because that's at the essence of the study. I think things like that need to be vetted in a timely manner, and so therefore I have had some conversations with some staff, and the city staff that I talked to were in favor of the weekly meetings because they thought that that was the most productive way of having the citizens' business heard and allowing citizens to come down and be heard on a regular basis. So That's my logic. I'm going to vote against it, but I'm not going to jump out the window if you all decide to do it. Thank you.
Councilman Kelly.
You know, and Councilman Ryan, that was my concern also. Speaking with some of the city employees, they felt like that, you know, they were, I guess maybe it's us trying to tell somebody else how to do their job, and in fact, they don't have a problem with doing their job. And, you know, they have to be here anyway. And I don't think that we have gotten any input from staff that states that, you know, because we meet every week, it's an overburden of duties and obligations that they have to comply with. And I also think it's a perception issue from the public as it relates to their trust to us as to what our role and duty is as it relates to our meeting obligations. I think everybody understands that from time to time there is a situation because of city business outside of the state of Oklahoma or outside of the city of Oklahoma that one or two of us may have to miss a council meeting. But I think that becomes even a more of a standout issue when you have every other meetings and two people have to, because of some commitment based on obligations with the city, to be out of city or out of state and can't be at the meeting, and then it looks like, you know, we got a really, empty council. And, you know, I just think that if we're doing this for 2 months, and what what is the benchmark you're looking for? Is staff going to come back and say, well, you know, our jobs was a lot easier because you guys only met every 2 weeks, every other week, or are they going to come back and say, you know, we're really being, you know, overtasked because of this every other week, and we have this overburden of preparing for that next agenda. So, in all due respect to Councilman Ryan, I can't support it.
Any further comments or questions? Councilman Ryan, I think I probably would echo a lot of those comments. I really respect the fact that this was an attempt to look at staff time and try to make this as efficient as possible. And I also have had a chance to visit with a number of them, and I think there's some benefit to be gained by them collectively being here together once a week. They get to talk to one another and share issues that are going on interdepartmentally, as well as being able to know that we're all here on Tuesdays. So is there a motion? You made a motion. Do we have a second?
Yes.
Okay. So a yes vote would approve this motion. So everybody cast your votes, please. And the item fails of a count from 5 to 3. Already, on to item 11, which are just, let's go ahead, I'm sorry, items from council. Pat, did you have anything else to add?
I'm humbled and silent at this point.
Skip, how about you? Yeah. Skip, items from council, nothing? David? No, thank you. All right.
Out of here as quickly as possible. I don't have any comments either.
Councilman McAtee. Councilman Shadid.
Well, I'll take the opportunity if nobody's going to. There is a lot going for Oklahoma City. Public health, as I think we've talked about, is not one of them. There is a movement, though, I think, and there's a few events. Whole Foods is going to open this Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock on 63rd and Western. Tomorrow at the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, we'll host a conference on bikeability and walkability. That's at 12 noon. A couple weeks ago, Moving Planet, we had about 150 to 200 people. We rode from Automobile Alley to City Hall and back. Had bicyclists, roller skaters, walkers. I think there's a growing consensus that we have this public health epidemic in Oklahoma City and that it's getting worse. I'm not going to go on and on. I just want to show 2 slides just to show that it's not just a public health issue, it's an economic development issue. There's something in place. There's so much momentum. There's so much inertia that it's not clear what it would take to stop this. In 1990, there was no state in the country that had an obesity rate greater than 20%. Today, there's no state in the country that has an obesity rate less than 20%. Colorado has the lowest now. It's right at about 20%. But if you took Colorado now and compared it to all the other states 20 years ago, it would have been the highest. Oklahoma, and Oklahoma City's right in the middle, had an obesity rate of about 14% in 1990. In 2000, it was 21%. In 2010, 31%. It's now about 33, 34%. There's evidence that it's increasing, that the rate is, if you average this out, it's about 1% per year. There's evidence that over the last 5 to 6 years, that rate is increasing. Now, this is, on our council, we have a mayor who's instituted probably the most efficient education program that I think a council or mayor could institute. But despite the education, despite all that, there's still this acceleration in the rate. Can you go to the next slide? And this is what's so frightening. I mean, we spend time on economic development. That we have $75 million in the 2007 bond for economic development issues. We've got MAPS 3, and if you take the rosiest pictures for all the MAPS 3 projects, the total economic development would be about $200 million. Well, if you look at this American Public Health Association study that estimated what the obesity-related health care costs would be for Oklahoma City and Oklahoma, keep in mind that about 10% of all health care costs are directly related to obesity. But you don't hear the politicians spending about 10% of their time talking about obesity. So we're missing the boat. If you look at Oklahoma City, 2008, a little over $200 million. Here, I think we're already here. We spend about, you have to estimate, but it's about $4.5 billion a year in Oklahoma City on healthcare costs, about 10% of that, so $400 million a year on obesity-related costs. You take this rate of population increase, the rate of healthcare costs increase, and this accelerated rate, and just in a few years, 2018, you're looking at an economic impact to Oklahoma City of $1.1 billion per year. I mean, that dwarfs anything else that we're talking about in terms of MAPS 3, the economic development from the 2007 bond. It's almost overwhelming. And it's a tax on businesses. It's a tax on the taxpayer who are covering Medicare, TRICARE, Medicaid. And it's clear that education alone is not going to turn this around. I'm not sure that anybody has a good plan. There really is no city, state, or federal government that doesn't have, like ostriches with their head in the sand, that has a well-formulated plan. But I just want to give voice to the sense of urgency that this is an economic tsunami coming at our city and state, and we have to do something. Perhaps, as Pat has alluded to many times, we start with our 4,300 city employees. But I encourage everyone to take part. There is a growing awareness, and there are more events. This event tomorrow at the Oklahoma City Community Foundation is one such example. It starts at 12 noon. Thank you.
Councilman Mars. Alrighty. So city manager reports, we've already obviously heard from the IMSA study, and we've deferred the downtown housing study.
We do have Mike Carrier here this morning.
I saw Mike Carrier here.
From the Convention Visitors Bureau to give us an update. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Couch. Council, good morning. I'll try to be brief and quick so that you can get out of here. I know you've had a long morning already. It's a pleasure to come before you today and give our final report from last fiscal year. It's been a while since the year was over, but with your all schedules and our schedules, it's been challenging to try to pair those up. But we're delighted to be here today and make a few comments about last fiscal year. First of all, I want to thank you all for the continued support that we receive from council as well as from city staff. I've said this before, and I will say it again. I have worked in a number of different cities and a number of different communities. I have never worked with a better group of both staff and political leaders in trying to sell tourism and conventions and sports events and other tourist-related activities in a community. I appreciate your all's support, as does the staff that works with me on a daily basis. We had a good year last year, not a great year, but a good year. We met most of our goals. The ones that we did not meet, we continue to work hard on, but we continue to be prospering well in what are challenging economic times. A lot of our competitive cities are still trying to rebound and would love to be in the position we are in. We have seen additional growth this year, and I'll be bringing a report to you very shortly. We have our first quarter behind us, but we've done a good job. We feel good about what's going on. We feel very good about the future of Oklahoma City. Events such as our major horse shows, our other equine events, our youth activities, our sports events, the conventions that come to Oklahoma City, the general tourism that comes here. People appreciate what's going on here, and they appreciate the level of service they receive throughout the city and the level of support that our industry gets. As far as the milestones last year that we did not meet, that is primarily because of what we are seeing as a little bit of a new phenomenon or a more recent phenomenon in the industry, and that is people being slower on the uptake in terms of making the final arrangements on their commitments. People are I won't say they're more hesitant to sign their contracts, but they certainly are not moving as fast as they have in the past. Part of that is because there is more competition out there. We're getting more competition from other cities. People are also asking for more from cities such as Oklahoma City, and so we continue to work with that. I can tell you that the folks who had not made their decisions by the end of the fiscal year have, and we were successful in getting those contracts signed, so they were all related to equine events, and we're moving ahead very nicely with those. If you have not taken the time, I know some of you talked earlier about going on ride-alongs with the police or fire. I would suggest you go on a ride-along this week out to the state fairgrounds to see the Morgan Show. This is the third during this calendar year of our contract shows, and is certainly a very impressive show, the Grand Morgan National Championships. Started last Saturday, will run through this coming Saturday. There are people from all 48 continental United States, beautiful horses, great events, and not being a typical Western breed, there are some events at this show that you won't see at any of the other shows. And so it's a beautiful place to go and see. I would also encourage you to walk through the barns. I ask you to do that because it will help you better understand what I believe it was the 2005 tax election that raised our hotel tax allowed us to do at the state fairgrounds to help these folks enjoy their experience here in Oklahoma City more by providing them some truly outstanding space. So we'll have some more of those things coming up, and you'll be receiving some invitations to some specific events later this fall. But again, thank you for your support and help. We look forward to continuing to work on your behalf and the city's behalf and produce better results and higher numbers as we move forward. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this or anything related to our tourism efforts.
Great. Councilman Ryan.
I'd just like to make a comment. Mike, your success on horse shows has been outstanding. Every time I come by that fairgrounds, it seems like the parking lot is full of horse trailers. And as a further example of your success, about 2 weeks ago I met a doctor from Chile. He asked me where you're from. I said Oklahoma City. He said, Oklahoma City, that's where all the horse shows are. And that was the first time I'd met somebody from outside the country who didn't relate us to Thunder or OU football. But it's a whole new area that I want to thank you for your efforts in that behalf, and that hopefully we are successful, continually successful, to attract more, bigger, and better horse shows. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. The horse shows are like virtually everything else we do. It's a team effort. It's not the CVB. It's Tim O'Toole and the State Fair folks. It's Tim Brassfield and the folks at All Sports Association. It's Gary DeJardins at the Cox Center and the Chesapeake. Have to be careful how you say that now. The Chesapeake Energy Arena. It's team efforts on all of these, and we've got some great partners here in the community that make it possible. Thank you, sir.
Comments, Larry.
Mike, I don't want to put you on the spot. I hope you have this figure. I drove by the fairgrounds last night and saw the full parking lot with all the trailers out there. I knew the Morgan Show was going on. A horse trailer parked out there means what to the city as far as revenue on a daily basis? Do you?
the figures that we use, the calculation we use is based on this. Over the history of the shows that we've been able to calculate, it appears that each horse that is entered in competition brings approximately 3.5 people to town with them. The people don't bring the horses bring the people. And we figure on a nightly basis, if you are spending the night in Oklahoma City, it costs about $216 per night, and that's food and beverage, it's gas, it's miscellaneous spending, it's your hotel room, all combined. So 3.5 people times $216 times the number of horses that are entered in the competition. And again, when you consider, and Fred Nava, who is the show manager for the Morgan show, Fred came in 3 weeks ago. He started bringing his staff, the production staff, in 3 weeks ago, back during the fair. So even though we didn't have a horse show then, they were here beginning their work locally on the fair. They are paying every night also. And so consequently, as you look at that, and this particular show runs Saturday through Saturday, a significant number of those folks are here over that entire period of time. Some do come and go. Many of them have multiple horses in the event. You know, so it's a significant amount of money that is produced here every year. You know, we estimate from all of the shows that are here, approximately 20 shows in the equine area, somewhere around $185 million a year of direct spending that they produce in Oklahoma City. It's easy to talk about those aspects, but don't forget they have to buy bedding for their horses. They have veterinary services that they need, feed. You know, some of them bring some of those things with them. A lot of them buy those things locally. And it's amazing the other spending that goes on here during a horse show.
Councilman Shadid.
One question. In terms of the March 2009 Convention Sports and Leisure study that estimated the increase in convention center business that could come with the building of a new convention center seemed to have a warning that if you were to accomplish that your CVB budget might be inadequate. I can't remember what they were talking, but estimated that you'd have to increase the CVB budget by $3, $4, $5 million. I can't remember exactly. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I feel very good about what we do with what we have. And I think Councilman Mars sits on our commission, and I think he can comment on that from a different perspective. It is not inexpensive to promote a city, and particularly when you are promoting in a variety of markets. We promote in the general tourism market. We promote in the conventions market, the sports market. So there's a lot of business out there that we do go after. We don't just go after convention business. Saying that, in building a new convention center and moving into a higher level of competition, it will cost us more. We will have to find ways to increase our budget. We're already looking at opportunities to do things outside of tax revenue that we work on now to find ways to increase our budget. But it is, you know, you can't go into this new arena or new convention center and continue to do the same things the same ways. We will be competing on a grander scale. We will not be competing, we compete with Dallas and Fort Worth and Denver and St. Louis and Kansas City and Chicago and a lot of other cities right now. Some of those cities we compete in a very narrow way. The cities we compete with on a regular basis, we're not that far behind in terms of our budget. So yes, we will need to increase our dollars. We will need to increase our promotional abilities and do more to attract meeting planners to come see Oklahoma City to make their decisions. But the return on that investment, again, at the numbers that I just talked about, it's the same kind of numbers for a convention. And the opportunity to do more in a convention center will certainly generate more tax dollars in our hotels, in our restaurants, in our retail operations, and in other ways for the community. So it's an investment well made.
Yes, Councilman Greenwell.
Mike, just to continue on, and I hope we don't go past the noon hour on this discussion, but with respect to the convention center, I think that we're at a competitive disadvantage if you compare the current convention center, mainly not so much just the size, but the technology demands that exhibitions and conventions now require that they didn't back when the old Myriad was first built 40 plus years ago. We are no longer competitive with even smaller markets who have put in a new convention center within the last 5 to 10 years. And it's my understanding that's one of the goals with the new convention center, is not just to make it bigger necessarily, but allow us to be more competitive just from a technology basis. You know, everybody now brings in computers and cell phones and all those kinds of issues. Can you speak on our competitiveness as we stand right now, even with some smaller markets? I think like Shreveport outdistance us as far as competitiveness, and you know how Pride gets going. We think we're pretty good in a lot of areas with a great basketball team and great college sport teams, and to hear of a city the size of Shreveport to dominate us is a little disappointing.
Well, we do have several competitive disadvantages, and you talk about technology. I don't have my flash drive with me, but I've got a flash drive that I have a short presentation on. That there's one very dramatic slide, and if you're over at the Cox Center, I would encourage you to ask somebody to open one of the floor pockets in the exhibit hall. Those are the big steel grates in the exhibit hall. Ask them to open that and look inside. What you will see is an electrical cable that comes out of that box and connects to a distribution box, which is fairly typical in a convention center. You will also see 2 telephone wall plugs. That's the extent of our technology in there. Now, those 2 wall plugs are used to plug in data lines or telephone lines, and that's fine. I happened to move here from Shreveport. I was the general manager of the Shreveport Convention Center and was involved in building it. In the floor boxes in the Shreveport Convention Center, we had 6 110 outlets. We had a 208 outlet that had a connection to go to one of those distribution boxes I was talking about a minute ago. Every box had a 208 30 amp. We had 20 boxes that had 208 50 amp. There were fiber optic connections. There were audio connections. There were data connections and telephone connections. There was a drain, and there were, the big thing in that building, there was empty conduit in a track under the floor that led to the equipment rooms in the back so that we could fish lines through there to add anything we needed to, including compressed gas, compressed air, water, anything that needed to be done. We had compressors in the back so we could run air lines through under the floor out to boxes throughout the building. That's the typical technology you find in a modern building. We didn't have a use for the fiber optic lines in the building, but we put them in when we built it because we don't know what's coming next. That's the important aspect. The size of the facility and what's changed in the marketplace. You hear all these places. I was in Las Vegas last week for a meeting. Their building has about 3 million square feet of exhibit space. Well, that's great. The meeting that I was at used about 50,000 square feet of exhibit space. Of course, while it was being run, they were setting up the National Business Air Association, and they were rolling airplanes down Paradise Avenue from the airport to the convention center to fill the other 2 million plus square feet with airplanes. Las Vegas is going to get that. We're not. That's why we recommended, and CSL working with us, we made the recommendation that we made on size. Convention groups are looking for more and more conference space. They look for exhibit space because exhibits is where they can make their money to run their shows and typically make some money for their association to continue to operate it. But as Councilman Greenwell was suggesting, the technology is where you really stand out, where you really have the opportunity to advance. And I will tell you a quick story. The first building in the country to go wireless was the Dallas Convention Center. And everybody was, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Dallas is going to be wireless. We can take our laptops, we can plug them up wherever we want to. They've got 750,000 square feet of exhibit space, real exhibit space. They had a big convention that used all of that. Everybody went in, plugged in their laptops to the electrical outlets, turned them on, and the system went deader than a doornail in 30 minutes. 4 days later, they had the system back up. They overloaded the wireless ability. So now when people walk in, it's like, I'm glad to see that you've got wireless access points, but where do I plug my computer in? I cannot depend on wireless access. We don't know what's next in technology. We have to be prepared for what's here today, and that's why in Shreveport we put in the fiber optics. It's why we put in empty conduit throughout the building so that you can do whatever needs to be done as you move into the future. That's what we've got to do here to make sure that we can provide for the future of Oklahoma City and not be stuck with the kind of facility we have now, which is not only out of date, but is I won't say impossible, but extremely expensive and extremely difficult to try to update and put in the types of technology that we really need. Any other questions for me?
Any other questions or comments? Mike, thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
all the work that you do.
Thank you.
City Manager, we have a couple of other reports.
I do want to point out that the downtown housing study is stricken. That does not mean that it's going away. It's just that we could not get the consultants in. We don't know the date specific that they will be here, so that's why we didn't continue it to a date specific. And then we do have the September sales and use tax, and we were 0.04% within target. And so I don't know if we've ever been that close to target before, but feel pretty good about that. We have subsequently received the October sales tax check, and a report will be forthcoming, but it was a very strong check for us.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
I'm sorry, you passed me by and I said nothing, but I forgot. We have a ribbon cutting at the Route 66 bridge today out at Lake Overholser. The historic truss bridge out there, refurbished it from the 2000 bond issue, and we're cutting the ribbon at 2 o'clock. So I invite all the public out that would like to see that. We're going to have some vintage cars on the bridge and so forth, so I think it'd be a good time to see that. And as I remove the darts from my back, I'll stay here till 5 o'clock if all my fellow council people will agree to stay with me.
You reminded me, I also want to remind everybody that Saturday, October 15th, is the grand opening and the ribbon cutting at the Myriad Gardens. I think 10 o'clock celebration with CEO of Devon, Larry Nichols, and Mayor Cornett will be there as well making some comments, but there are activities all day long beginning at 8 o'clock in the morning through the evening. Music, food, celebration, so please everybody come down and see the new Myriad Gardens. Are there any citizens? Pat, I see you out here alone. Are there any citizens to be heard? Don't see any, and I guess with that we are adjourned.